and welcome to the Effective Literacy Podcast. I'm Anna.
And I'm Victoria.
And we are excited to have you with us today. If today is your first day listening with us, we are educators who share a passion for reading and all things literacy. We've come together today and in our past episodes in an effort to better understand the newest research around reading pedagogy. We've noticed a trend toward more phonics and foundational skills instruction and less emphasis on content knowledge, language development, meaning making, and effective expression. So to make sense of it all, we've been interviewing experts from across the nation who have extensive knowledge in literacy and multilingual education and having discussions with them about how to better support our students, our teachers, and specifically our multilingual learners in an effort to become more literate individuals by the time they graduate.
So in today's episode, things are a little different. Anna and I are going to roll this one by ourselves, just the two of us, but it's really about us making meaning of our guests. Together, Anna and I have a collective 40 years in education. And Anna, I hate to say that every time we do.
I know, it hurts my feelings.
I know. And every time Anna and I go to a conference, we read a new theory book, we, learn anything about education. We know that one of the most important things to do is to find other educators to talk about what we've learned, right? To really help us make sense and make meaning of that learning. So today we're spending some time really making sense of episode 13, 14, and 15, which is Dr. Susana Johnson, David Rogers, and Cristina Sánchez-López. If you haven't yet listened to those episodes, we recommend you might want to go back and listen to them, or you might want to listen to us first and then decide how you want to go. Either way works with us. We're happy to have you with us. So Anna, we are now on episode 16. We've had 9 total guests. We've had 16 episodes. And I'm really starting to see that we have a lot of common themes. And I think we heard these common themes from Dr. Johnson, David Rogers, and Cristina Sánchez-López. So what common themes did you hear?
So in going back and listening to all of those episodes, I definitely put some notes down that those common themes that we're hearing from the 3 of them, as well as from our previous guests, are things that we know and value, but it's also just really validating to some of those thoughts and discussions that we've had in our previous, not only meaning making, but just in the conversations that Victoria and I have had together around how do we support teachers and learners with literacy. And so one thing that I think that we've heard a lot of and that we want to make sure that we're really bringing to the surface of all of our conversations is acknowledging and building on students' home language and experiences. And that's where we need to start, right? And while that may look different depending on the language of instruction or the language of the teacher, that not only just acknowledgement, but also building upon the home language experiences and the experiences that student may have had before they come into the classroom. In addition to that, I think it's really important that then we think about, so how are the lessons that I'm developing really cultivating a rich literacy experience for my students, not necessarily by blocks of time or minutes, but really thinking about how am I using oral language skills that students have in primary language and additional language? How am I strengthening those and then using those to build those reading and writing skills that we know are really important as students advance in their academic career? Once those oral language skills are strong and students are confident, then we know that we can teach reading and teach writing explicitly while giving students a place to put those explicitly learned skills. And all of those pieces will come together so that they can become those literate individuals. And then one thing that I think we're starting to toy around with is then what do you do with that literacy? So all of those pieces that we've heard in all 3 episodes, I think are those resonating thoughts that we keep toying around with, but really today, I think I'm really coming to a place of this is what I want to hold for myself as I support literacy at my site.
That makes perfect sense. And, like you said, we've heard this, I think, from all 9 guests, right? About that we have to have these literacy rich classrooms, that we have, print has to be everywhere, that we have to really play with language. We have to bring everything together. And so I think it's important that we keep hearing the same message. And I think it's important for us in this inquiry model, finding out exactly what is effective literacy, of that if you're hearing the same thing, there's that commonality and that theme to it. So I'm also thinking about in these episodes, what did we hear that we haven't heard so much about before? Or that, that maybe we've heard a little bit about, but they were phrased in such a way. One of the things that we heard about in these episodes is about translanguaging, which Dr. Johnson talked a lot about translanguaging. And I really like thinking about this, and I want to think about how to use it more in my own classroom, how to use it more in the classrooms that I support. And this idea of translanguaging is so key to really supporting our students and honoring our students. David also talked about the idea of like honoring our students are really giving them like the social cultural skills and social cultural identities. Mm-hmm. And that idea that by helping our students support those identities, we're helping them be critical thinkers.
Absolutely. And I think it's a big shift from the code switching, right? And so a lot of us who got our credentials back when we did, there was a lot of work around code switching and acknowledging and valuing it. But this is a yes and, right? So how am I then taking this concept of code switching and then moving towards a more inclusive and culturally sustaining approach with the translanguaging? And what am I doing, even if I'm a monolingual teacher or I'm a monolingual site administrator or professional development provider, but how am I then building in this expectation that what students bring to us in their primary language is really important for expression. And we don't want to limit kids' ability to express themselves because that experience maybe didn't happen in a way that they can express themselves in the language of instruction. If the language of instruction is a dual language program, then all the better, right? But this idea of translanguaging is really assets based, and I think a place that we absolutely want to embrace and move towards.
Absolutely. The other thing that it really makes me think about, which you just reminded me again, is this idea when we're thinking about literacy development in a monolingual approach, right? And we're not taking into account what happens on the home language side of literacy, right? Or what happens in between the two language developments. We're missing out on a lot for our students, and we're missing out on really that assets-based classroom. We might say we're an assets-based classroom. We might do everything that we can to show that. But if we're constantly showing that we value a monolingual society and a monolingual classroom, are we really an assets-based classroom?
That's a big question. And I think for teachers, the question is, and for administrators, and really for everybody all the way up to the district office and to the state level is, so then what do we do? Right? How do we move toward, I say I'm assets-based versus I show I'm assets-based?
Well, I don't know that I have an answer, but I think that one of the things that we talked about in this, these series is this idea that what if instead of having English learners as an afterthought in our classroom, what if we started our lessons designing for an English learner? And we kind of joked around with David a little bit. What if we just did it for a week? Just a week. We designed our lessons specifically for our English learners first, and then thought about our monolinguals. What if we designed our assessments? Right? Like we talked a lot about our assessments and this idea that our assessments are really showing the value of the monolingual classroom.
Right. 100%. And our assessments reflect our value, right? And what gets assessed gets taught. So I think the idea of what if, right? It's that giving teachers permission to take a step aside and say, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to teach with my, maybe I have 3 English learners in my class. Maybe I have 33 English learners in my class. But am I using the materials that I have? And then going down to, we've talked about this so many times, but going down to the little side, like reading through the directions. If I have an adopted curriculum, I'm reading through the lesson and then I'm going, okay, and then now let me look here to the side versus let me think about who are my English learners, what is it that they need, and what does this curriculum offer to me to help them to reach those grade level standards. Because I think we need to really think about what's our, and you and I use this term a lot, what's our intended outcome of the lesson. So if we know their intended outcome is to help students to, like a third grade standard in California is like identify main idea using key details. So then what does that look like? And then using those resources to plan from there. And it's going to look different if I have 3 versus 33. But I need to know who my students are and what their assets are. And then I start planning.
You know what? Another thing that you just said, and it reminded me of what Cristina had said, is this idea that we have to start with the standards, right? Mm-hmm. That our standards really tell us what's grade level appropriate. And how are we making sure that our students are getting that opportunity to master their grade level standards? And I think that that's a big thing. And I think, as a classroom teacher, I was guilty of it. I often went away from my standards. And it's about coming back and looking and really assessing, is the lesson that I've created, is the unit that I'm working on grade level appropriate? Or have I simplified my lessons?
And have I adjusted my lessons over the years? Because if I'm teaching the lesson the same way now that I did even just last year, I need to at least double check because the students that I have this year have different needs. And while I know as the leader of instruction in my classroom what my grade level standards are, and if I don't know, I need to go double check because sometimes you forget some of those little details, right? So I need to double check what the standard is and then look at what are the resources I have and do they meet the needs of my students? Because if we're doing activities just for activity's sake, or saying, oh, well, I need to make sure I have more oral language in this lesson, then we want to make sure that that oral language opportunity is a scaffold so that students can meet that math standard, or that the discussion that they're having in the sentence frames that I'm providing, or the opportunity to discuss in the primary language first, that lesson customization is all with the intended outcome of I'm helping students to reach grade level standards.
Right. And I think it's important for us just to restate that when we're talking about standards, we're talking about content standards and English language development standards. In the state of California, those two standards, they work in tandem with each other. And our English language development standards really help us know what scaffolds are appropriate for our students in their language development, as well as how to really reach that content.
And if that's something that our listeners aren't necessarily that comfortable with, there are a lot of resources that, we can maybe put on the website as different places that you might go or trainings that you might attend. As much as I know we're all really busy and there's a lot of needs, if you're listening to the podcast and you're already, engaged in these conversations. And so then my thought is, how can we support our own professional development? If this is resonating with you and you're thinking, oh, you know what, I should get back on those ELD standards, or maybe I do need to really think about how am I thinking about what assets my students have and how do I then build upon that? So there are definitely those conversations and resources that we can put into the show notes so that teachers can develop themselves professionally in the way that they know that they need to do.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things that I think it's so important that we always say that teachers of reading read, teachers of writing write. Teachers should also continuously be learning. We need to also remember always what it's like to be a student and continue to challenge ourselves and to learn more and to perfect more
Yeah. And that makes me kind of think, I'm going back to my notes on Susana. And when we asked her, how does she, when she's working with teachers, help them to identify what parts of a curriculum they should really be paying attention to? And something that she said is that, no publisher is going to make a curriculum perfect for your specific students. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that the publisher, wasn't thinking about your kids. It just means that the publisher was making a curriculum for that specific grade level in the entire state of your, whatever state you're in. And so then we use our teacher agency to then customize what we have at our access to help our students, like I said, meet that grade level expectation. And that teacher agency is going to look different depending on where you are. Maybe your grade level has an expert in the field of multilingual education. And so you just pop over next door versus you're the only person at your grade level. So then you might need to step outside and look at what's available maybe on my state's Department of Education, or what organizations do I really trust when it comes to professional development. Maybe I can grab a recorded webinar just to kind of refresh my memory. But that teacher agency is also teacher agency for ourselves. And if you're listening to the podcast, this is, like I said, obviously something that you find valuable and important. And maybe you're thinking, oh, I have these great ideas. So the other thing of teacher agency is also sharing those great ideas and making sure that you're working with your grade level colleagues and thinking about how are we as a grade level or as a department making sure that we're prioritizing English learners or multilingual learners in our instruction so that we meet those grade level standards.
Yeah. And I think that we heard that very clearly from Cristina, right? About this idea of making sure that you have a team, but also part of that teacher agency is really knowing your students and knowing, how to tap into their funds of knowledge, how to really make sure that you're giving them the critical thinking skills. And so again, it's like this, it's a masterful web, right? And we as teachers, we're artists, that we're taking our colleagues, we're taking our agency, we're taking our curriculum, we're taking our standards, we're taking the knowledge of our students, and we're weaving this all together into these masterful lessons. And this idea that you touched on, like maybe we had this perfect lesson last year, but we have a whole different group of kids this year. And so what do we have to change about that lesson? Or should we take that idea and start over kind of thing, right? And start over with the same idea, but think about, okay, this group, again, instead of thinking about our English learners as that afterthought, thinking about our students this year as that afterthought, right? And like, they're not the afterthought. Let's start with them.
For sure. I was just thinking about the resources that are available to teachers and jumping on some of those websites where teachers reach out and look for, oh, I need a thing. I need a thing to help with this lesson that I'm going to teach. So I just was doing a quick Google search. I won't give any names or anything like that, but there are lots of things out there. Right. But I think the most valuable thing that we have is our colleagues and our experiences and our own, pedagogical knowledge. And so just jumping on something that you can make a quick copy of may or may not really help your individual students.
And I'm going to push back a little bit. I think one of our other values, right, that we have is, again, going back to those standards.
Right.
At some point, we gotta confirm that we're at grade level. There, especially in the work that I'm doing now, there's too many times that we're all so well-intentioned. We're so well-intentioned. We've created these amazing lessons. They're so engaging. They're working. And then we realize that they're like 3 to 4 levels below where they're supposed to be. And how can we, scaffold up? How can we make sure that we're meeting our students where they are, and we're making sure that they're mastering what they need to be doing at this grade level. So Anna, I'm curious, as a site principal, what might be some of your next steps?
I think for me, the biggest thing that I'm thinking about and that I'm kind of moving towards, right? We've been spending a lot of time having conversations about what are we still thinking about. And I think that's important. But then also now, what are we not necessarily inspired to do, but what are we going to do? And so for me, I think the next steps that I need to move toward are asking questions, because we've been having a lot of conversations around what does good literacy look like? How are you prioritizing your multilingual learners? How are you connecting with families? And so then those things are good things for teachers and for sites to reflect upon. But now the question is, so with those decisions that we're making, are we meeting the intended outcome, right? What's the intended outcome? And are we getting there? And it doesn't mean that we have to wait until an assessment cycle and use our district adopted assessment, right? Whether that's by trimester or by the year, but really thinking about, did that lesson hit the mark? And are the decisions that I'm making really advancing literacy skills, helping students to reach grade level standards? And did I prioritize and ensure that my English learners, my multilingual learners had access to their grade level content? Did the decisions that I made, if I did go find a thing or a resource, did that thing that I maybe purchased or that I found from a colleague who said they had success with it, did my student have success with it? Was that the thing that helped my student or my group of students to master those grade level standards? So I think for me, it's really getting to the question of, okay, now we have these common agreements, and now we're making some decisions, and are those decisions actually having the impact that we're hoping?
I think that asking questions of ourselves, or the why, right? The why question is something in education that we don't often do. We don't often ask our colleagues why, right? And again, that does it have the desire or the intended outcome?
Yeah. And it's not a why from like a judgy place, like, why are you doing that? But more so like, tell me why you're doing that. What's making you think that? And then what, right? That it's more of like a why that to kind of bring on a discussion and from a learning approach.
Absolutely. And I think some of our next steps as we're continuing in our inquiry through the podcast is about what kind of experts do we want to invite next. And I really think, Anna, one of our key pieces that we need to have an expert in the classroom. We need to have a current classroom teacher really share with us his or her, art. How do they weave all of this together? How do they make sure that home language side of literacy development isn't absent in the classroom? I also think maybe we need to talk to some experts on like the bilingual brain, right? And what's happening in that brain and what happens when we do have that absence, and how do we make sure that we show that value? I also think that another piece that we really need to think about is having an expert here about our teacher prep programs around the nation. And how are we making sure that we're supporting that teacher agency, that we're cultivating that teacher agency, that we're really telling teachers, hey, you have this power. I think those might be some of our concrete next steps.
I think those are great next steps, especially the idea of the bilingual brain, right? And kind of going back to David and the piece on assessment, that we're not assessing necessarily what's happening in the bilingual brain. We're really assessing from a monolingual perspective in a lot of situations. Not all of them, of course, not all of them, but some of our assessments are definitely looking at it from a monolingual perspective. And it just makes me wonder what we're leaving out and who we're leaving out and what experiences are being left out. So I think that expert will be really important to hear from.
Absolutely. So Anne and I want to thank you for joining us today on this Making Meaning of the Effective Literacy podcast. For more information, to get access to our resources, and to, share with us your action steps, join us at multilingualliteracy.org and make sure to subscribe to our podcast. We want to thank you again. Bye-bye.